what we recognized was that one of the most foundational issues in user experience really is the onboarding, right? And the necessity to download MetaMask and to generate a seed phrase and to save it on a piece of paper and put it in your file safe is far too complex and is way too removed from what users are typically used to in Web 2. Basically, a year ago, we started working quite heavily on account abstractions. And so, in our case, materialized through a product called Universal Accounts. Sort of like an evolution of account abstraction that allows users to simply have a single balance with a single account usable across any chain. So I can have 10 USDC on Polygon and 10 on Avalanche and 10 on Arbitrum. And I actually, in that case, have 30 USDC that I can use anywhere. And so there's no distinction between where I hold my assets and what I can use on these applications. It's just a single balance everywhere.
Welcome to the Edge Podcast. I'm DeFi Dad here with Nomadic from 4RC. Today's show spotlights chain abstraction and particle network. In this episode, we do a deep dive on what is chain abstraction and how Particle Network aims to simplify the crypto user experience by unifying access to all blockchains through universal accounts. But before we do, just a quick word from our sponsors who make the Edge podcast possible. Discover MERLIN Chain, the cutting-edge Bitcoin Layer 2, trusted with over $2 billion in total value locked. MERLIN revolutionizes Bitcoin by unlocking its true potential with native L1 assets, lightning-fast transactions, and ultra-low fees on an EVM-compatible network. Elevate your Bitcoin experience with MERLIN Chain today at merlinchain.io. Power up your portfolio by borrowing, lending, and multiplying your favorite assets, made safe and easy by the industry-leading automation tools at SUMMER.FI. SUMMER.FI offers a curated DeFi experience to access the highest quality protocols and strategies. Discover new earn strategies for your portfolio in a user-friendly app designed to filter based on the tokens you hold, the networks you transact on, the protocols you trust, and the highest available yields. Learn more today at SUMMER.FI, the best place to borrow and earn in DeFi. Tired of hopping between tabs, searching for new tokens before the hype catches on? Try MATCHA.XYZ, the DEX aggregator from 0x. Matcha connects hundreds of DEXs so you can trade millions of tokens and find fresh new drops. Matcha works out the best route to save you money on every trade. Swaps are free and Matcha has everything you need to trade on-chain. Gasless swaps, limit orders, and cross-chain, all in one place. Search Trade Done at matcha.xyz. Catch the tide of the mainnet launch of Puffer Finance. Whether you're an Ethereum staker or an aspiring node operator, Puffer delivers the decentralization revolution with its cutting-edge technology. Start with just 2 ETH to unlock the potential of native liquid restaking and maximize your earnings. Join the movement now and anchor your stake at puffer.fi. All right, let's introduce Tabasco, Head of Developer Relations at Particle Network. Tabasco, welcome to the Edge Podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty good. I'm looking forward to our conversation here and talking a little bit more about chain abstraction. I think this narrative, of course, has been insane over the past few months, and so I think there's a lot of angles that we can dive into here. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, this is a nice continuation of conversations we've had with other guests about chain abstraction. So we're going to learn about Particle Network as an L1 for unifying all chains through what's known as universal accounts. And so if you've ever heard of wallet abstraction or chain abstraction, hopefully we'll connect the dots for you and how that simplifies the user experience for those of us that are early adopters of DeFi or any sort of Web3 application. So Tabasco, why don't we talk a little bit more about just your background? You have a really remarkable story, I think, getting started at a young age in crypto. So whatever you can share about that, and then we can get right into Particle Network.
Yeah, for sure. Happy to give a little bit of an intro. So I guess just to preface, you mentioned about I do developer relations at Particle Network. I've been doing developer relations for a little bit of time now. I think maybe 3.5 years or something like that. Previously, I did developer relations at an RPC provider for quite a long time. And so I originally got into the space probably 4 or 5 years ago. Originally when I had basically just turned 15, I started kind of getting quite deep into crypto and building things and stuff like that. Originally I started out of interest for the surge of, I think it was the Dogecoin price. It interested me because I was like, it did some 20-30x, and I was like, there's an opportunity here to make some extra money, and I wanted to, I don't know, buy skins on video games or something. And so I started mining Dogecoin actually, and then I got into Bitcoin mining, and eventually that led into me sort of like participating in the community and chatting in a lot of different Discord groups. And I learned quite quickly that I'm not a very good trader, and I'm not good at making money by trading tokens and predicting the market. And so what I wanted to do was I became quite interested in the actual underlying technology behind all this, which was blockchain. And so I did a lot of research into that. And probably when I was around 15 and a half, I started kind of relearning all of the previous programming languages that I had sort of abandoned for quite a while. So I got really into Python for a long time and things like this, which eventually led to me creating my first project called DEFI. I started that when I was 15. And so that was sort of like a project centered around bringing the ability to use wallets and interact on chain directly to Discord, because I was a big fan of like interacting with these Discord communities. And so what I wanted to do was sort of take the on-chain experience directly to those communities through Discord. So I built this application, and it took a while to get to a state where it was usable and where it was decently well featured, but it eventually it grew quite well, I think, to a few thousand users. It was quite big within the Harmony ecosystem, if you guys are familiar with that chain. Not as lively today, but back then it had a lot of good traction. And so I built for that community a lot and did a lot of things with that project in there. And eventually, I decided after building that for probably around a year or close to a year, I wanted to work in Web3. I was at the time working at a tire shop down the road from where I live, and I was changing tires and fixing flats and stuff like that. And I very much disliked doing that, and so I wanted to do something that I was more comfortable with, which was Web3, and I'd already been building for quite a while. So I decided to I just applied to a bunch of different things and found developer relations to be quite an interesting role, and that's when I had the opportunity to join that RPC provider back a few years ago, and things led to the other, and I joined Particle in September of last year, so I've been here for around a year now. And I'm 18 now, so I've been in the space and working for full-time for a few years. And that first job that I got at the RPC provider was I was 16. So about 3 years of working in developer relations at this point. So it's been quite the journey so far.
I feel like there's a natural progression from, tire shop to working in crypto, that it's pretty much how most people onboard into crypto, I'm pretty sure. So, Ethan, that's a cool story, man. Maybe just tell us a little bit more about the Particle Network genesis and the reasoning behind Particle Network, like maybe the why.
Yeah, for sure. I guess just to kind of preface a little bit, for a long time at Particle Network, really since we started, our focus has always been user experience. And so how do you solve core user experience issues in Web3? And how do you ultimately make the experience of Web3 more palatable to consumers and to general users? So this has really been our focus for a long time. So we were started a few years ago, back in kind of 2021, 2022 is when we started kind of taking off and shipping a lot of products. We started originally as what you can call wallet as a service. Wallet as a service in this case mostly refers to social logins, right? So being able to onboard into Web3 using your Google account, your Twitter, and your email and stuff like that. And so that was our focus for a long time, and that was kind of where we started. And you can consider that wallet abstraction to some degree, basically the ability to create an application embedded wallet without the need to download something like MetaMask or Phantom or whatever it may be. You just log in with your Google account or with your phone number, and now you have a wallet that you can use within an application. And so the reason why we started here is because, what we recognized was that one of the most foundational issues in user experience really is the onboarding, right? And the necessity to download MetaMask and to generate a seed phrase and to save it on a piece of paper and put it in your fire safe is far too complex and is way too removed from what users are typically used to in Web2. And so we felt that the existing onboarding experience for most users, especially these consumers with traditional wallets, was just totally impractical for any real adoption. I mean, even today, I don't really see a future where everybody in my neighborhood has a seed phrase written down somewhere and is using MetaMask. I think this is just like not a necessarily practical way to go about things. And so that's where social logins come in, where it's like, okay, well, you don't need to do this anymore. You just go to the application, you choose your Google account, and you have basically the exact same functionality that you do with MetaMask, but you don't have all the baggage that's attached to that. And so we started there, and we actually got a lot of great feedback from that. We're one of the original organizations to kind of bring that to the ecosystem, and we grew that a lot. I think at this point we have around 900 applications in total that are using that product, which is great because it was just kind of like a natural progression of people wanting to integrate it. Because as a developer, I mean, it's you're just basically unlocking more market for your application, and so. But what we recognize is that experience is great, but there's still a lot of UX issues. Like just being able to get users into applications is not enough. Actually, there's a lot of issues with the actual interactions within that application, the necessity to pay gas fees, issues with still like recovering your account, the necessity that you need to sign every transaction. I mean, like these small things that add up and make the experience just a little bit more than what people are comfortable with. And so basically a year ago, we started working quite heavily on account abstraction, and we got really into basically evolving the social logins into not only social logins leading into typical normal accounts, but social logins actually leading into smart accounts or smart contract wallets using account abstraction. And so that was kind of how we shifted things, and we really focused on not only onboarding via socials, but specifically onboarding into these account abstraction wallets, which therefore allowed not only for that initial UX boost through social logins, but also, of course, the UX boost of account abstraction, which allows for gasless transactions, session keys to remove pop-ups, social recovery, programmable wallets. I mean, all these interesting things that give developers a lot more flexibility, and of course, users have an enhanced experience. And so we felt that like with that product, we had basically solved to a large extent what you can understand as the application level user experience. So with account abstraction, with social logins, with these kind of core technologies, you can create a fantastic user experience in the confines of one application. And actually, you can create a user experience that feels a lot like Web 2. And this is not far-fetched. It's actually already possible with these technologies where you can onboard it with your social account. You can never pay gas fees. You can never really sign transactions. You just click buttons and everything happens on chain. You don't really know it. And that's possible today. And so that's really the experience that we wanted to create. And we felt we were successful at that. But what we recognize is that, okay, we saw that, but there's actually another larger underlying issue that we, along with many others, have started to recognize recently, which is that like the ecosystem level user experience is pretty terrible. Right? So it's fine if you can get users into a single application, that's great. But as soon as those users want to actually interact with the ecosystem, especially the Ethereum ecosystem, that experience breaks down into something that is unusable for consumers. And this has a lot of other problems attached to it that maybe we can talk about later. But that's where we basically this year and over the past 8 or 9 months, we wanted to focus on this idea of chain abstraction, which basically kind of in our case materialized through a product called Universal Accounts, which is sort of like an evolution of account abstraction that allows users to simply have a single balance with a single account usable across any chain. So I can have 10 USDC on Polygon and 10 on Avalanche and 10 on Arbitrum. And I actually, in that case, have 30 USDC that I can use anywhere. And so there's no distinction between where I hold my assets and what I can use on these applications. It's just a single balance everywhere. So that's kind of what we're building with Universal Accounts. And that's a feature that we're building towards at the moment.
Tabasco, you started to define chain abstraction. For folks that are new to this, can you just dumb that down further for us? Maybe give a few more examples of like, how will chain abstraction, benefit the average DeFi user or the average like Web3 user?
Yeah, for sure. So we actually produced an article a few weeks back that sort of tries to give a formal definition to what is chain abstraction. So if you try to look up on Google or on Twitter, what is chain abstraction, you're actually going to get a lot of different answers because it's so new that there's a lot of different ways to define it. But what we found to be most consistent and most accepted is this definition that chain abstraction is a user experience exempt from the manual processes required to interact with multiple chains. And so what I mean by this is specifically a user experience that doesn't require users to do things like bridging or managing multiple balances on different chains or managing multiple different wallets or really even needing to necessarily understand what chains that they're using. It simply moves the landscape from essentially like needing to pay mind to the chain that you're using to just purely using the applications that you want. So this is what chain abstraction is enabling. Because at the moment, when as a user, as a DeFi user, or really as any typical Web3 user, when you're using an application, you have a relationship with two entities. You have a relationship with the application, and you also have a relationship with the chain that application is using, because you need to pay attention to, do you have balances on this chain? How do I get balances of this chain, all these properties of the chain that you have to specifically understand to use this application, and especially even more so when you're moving from different applications on different chains. And so chain abstraction is just simply removing that second aspect of the user relationship. It's eliminating the need to have any sort of relationship with the chain, where now users, everything that they used to have to cognitively manage themselves, particularly things like, how they get balances from chain A to chain B, what are do they have balances on this chain, et cetera, et cetera. This is actually handled for the user, and they no longer have to worry about this, right? So as a DeFi user, if I'm, for example, doing something on an application, earning yield or something on an application that's on Base, and I have a balance there, and I have an application that I'm interacting with, I can use the profit from that, or I can use my balances from that application on that chain anywhere else, on Avalanche, on Arbitrum, in the future even Solana and stuff like this. And as a user, I have actually by default, I have no perception that I'm even bridging here, or that I'm using multiple different chains. The ecosystem is switched to being a collection of applications sorted in these categories between other chains, and it shifts from that into just an ecosystem of applications. To end users, every application is on a level playing field. It's just an app to them. They just go and use it. The chain that app is using is totally relevant. And so this is really what chain abstraction is enabling. It is the ability to just use apps within the ecosystem without needing to really understand the underlying infrastructure. So chains transition to sort of being like how cloud providers are to Web 2. Like, we're using Riverside at the moment. I don't care if Riverside is using AWS or GCP. They can use it whatever they want. It's kind of irrelevant to me. And so the same thing happens with Web3 now, where an application, they deploy on whatever chain works best for them. If an application thinks that Arbitrum is best for them, then they can deploy there. If an application wants to do their own app chain because that's what works best for them, they can do that. But as a user, I actually don't really care. I just want to use the application, right? And so this is basically what chain abstraction is enabling.
Yeah, users have been having to make far too many, I guess, like technical decisions at the current state of crypto, and just do too many tasks, and just, too many frictions in place. So this is going to be huge. I'm curious kind of like how you see the landscape, maybe like if you can call out some of the other players in the landscape, and maybe where Particle Network fits in that stack. Like, there's this kind of burgeoning stack of chain abstraction players that they all seem to kind of have their own niche. So yeah, just curious where Particle Network fits in this kind of growing stack.
Yeah, it's a good question. And it's a very common topic in the chain abstraction vertical, because chain abstraction is particularly unique in that it's quite an ambitious vision for the future of Web3. It's not as simple as it might seem as a goal of just basically allowing users to just use apps without needing to understand chains. On a technical level, it's quite complicated. There's a lot of moving parts that go into that, because it's needing to understand and use distinct chains is so fundamentally baked into the user experience and what they need to do, that abstracting that requires a lot of different, ultimately, layers of solutions that work together to address different parts of the problem here. And so this is where you have basically two different frameworks that are most popular in kind of contextualizing the composition of chain abstraction. So the first is something that you guys might have heard of before, or other listeners might have heard of before, which is something called the Cake framework. The Cake framework is the most popular way of really understanding the technologies that compose chain abstraction. So the layers of tech that enable chain abstraction. So the Cake framework basically allows you to understand how do intents fit into this? How does account abstraction fit into this? How do oracles and share sequencers and all these things, how do these fit into the stack? And so I'd recommend for anybody interested to do some research into that, and you can really understand what on a tech level actually enables chain abstraction, how these things fit together. When you look at the landscape and specifically the projects building for chain abstraction, the best way to look at this is through something that we can call the multi-layer framework. And so this is actually something that we produced at Particle a few months back. The multi-layer framework is basically acknowledging the fact that chain abstraction needs multiple layers of solutions that are each addressing niche parts of the problem to collectively enable chain abstraction. So chain abstraction is inherently collaborative for this reason. You have a vertical stack of solutions that are kind of, each supporting to enable this vision. And so the stack is basically defined by three key layers. The first is what you can understand as the application layer chain abstraction. So this is chain abstraction that is specifically geared towards developers. It's giving developers the ability to create applications that compose across any chain within the ecosystem, applications that can interact with any chain, that can have workflows and transactions that can exist across 5, 10 different blockchains. So I can sign something on this application, and that application can then go forth and do transactions across the entire ecosystem. And as a user, I don't really know. I'm just using the app. And so it gives developers the ability to create what you can understand as almost chain agnostic applications. So applications that can orchestrate things across multiple different chains, workflows of intents and things that are chain agnostic in nature and really give more power to the user. And so that's what application level chain abstraction is. It's developer facing implementation of chain abstraction applied to applications specifically. Below that, you have account level chain abstraction. This is where we fit a particle. Account level chain abstraction is chain abstraction that is more broadly user facing. So it's specifically focused on enabling chain abstraction for end users, and specifically doing this through the account level. So how do we give users the ability to use a single balance across all chains, to have a single identity across all chains through the means of their account? And so this is what we do at Particle Network with universal accounts. We do account level chain abstraction. It's giving users the ability to have one account, one balance across any chain. And so we're not the only player in this regard, though, and I'll mention a few in a moment. But that's essentially what account level chain abstraction is. It's just purely the ability to apply chain abstraction to user accounts, and it's more user facing than the developer facing application level chain abstraction is. Finally, within the stack, this is a more debated part of the stack, but it's also a quite an interesting component that you guys might be familiar with, which is blockchain level chain abstraction, which refers to collectives of chains that are intrinsically interoperable and share liquidity and stuff like this. So think Polygon Ag Layer is a blockchain level chain abstraction. This is the ability to have multiple chains that agree to share things like liquidity and have unified communication standards and make interoperability far more efficient than between chains that don't have like these shared properties, right? And so the stack basically consists of, ideally you have an ecosystem of chain collectives that have really rich interoperability. You have account level chain abstraction projects, which give chain abstraction to user accounts. It gives users the ability to have a single balance everywhere. Then you have applications that use orchestration or application level chain abstraction projects, which are solutions which give them the ability to compose and exist across whatever chain that they want to simultaneously. And so these three layers of solutions collectively are what enable what we can consider as a full chain abstracted experience, right? At every point in the stack, you have intrinsic interoperability. You have the ability to use multiple different chains all at once. You have users that are agnostic to what chain that they're using. And so this experience at every level removes the need to pay mind to and really morph around the chain that you're using. And it creates a ton of flexibility in this regard. As some players in this space at the application level, we can start there, include people like Agoric. They kind of coined this term orchestration to some degree. You have Socket, who's creating this MOFA protocol, which allows developers to compose and sort of like intent-like workflows across any chain. You have Octa, which is also doing orchestration. You have Cluster, which is doing account abstraction based chain abstraction, which basically they have these things called interchain transactions, and they're also doing modules with Rhinestone smart accounts, and they're doing some really cool stuff on that side. But they basically have like sort of like orchestration for developer-facing chain abstraction. At the account level, you have, of course, Particle Network. You have Orb Labs, which is what we call a chain abstraction provider. They do things through the means of like a wallet provider. You have Arcana, Zion, some other projects of this nature. At the blockchain level, you have Polygon Ag Layer, Optimism Superchain, zk-Sync Elastic Chain, stuff like this. Even Avail Nexus is also what we could consider blockchain level chain abstraction. And so that's how you can understand the stack. And these are the layers and how they work in this vertical and how they kind of all fit together.
Before we get back to the show, just a quick thanks to our sponsor at Mantle Network, the layer 2 that pioneered the 5th largest LST with 1.6 billion TVL called MATCH. Since July 1st, Mantle is running a 100-day airdrop campaign called Metamorphosis to distribute a new governance token for the Mantle liquid staking protocol called Cook. The community can earn points for Cook called Powder by holding METH in Metamorphosis and simultaneously enjoying other yield and reward opportunities in the Mantle ecosystem. Users can also earn Powder by staking MNT in the Mantle Rewards Station. For more details, go to the Mantle blog at mantle.xyz/blog and follow the 0xmantle handle on Twitter for more updates.
Tabasco, what do you say to, I'm seeing kind of on, crypto Twitter, there's just been this like relentless barrage of infrastructure projects that have been kind of I want to almost say jam down the throat of retail. And I think it's left retail, however you define retail, I guess, with almost like a bad taste in their mouth from a lot of these VC narratives that emerge. And then they get issued at high FDVs. And I can just see, in general, people are just getting over a lot of this infrastructure stuff. And I guess my question is, like, what do you say to, I guess, some cynics out there that question, is chain abstraction just another kind of like narrative gambit by VCs? Like, why should people care, essentially? Like, why is it different this time, if that makes sense?
Yeah, this is a good question. I wrote a big article, or not a big article. I wrote an article on Twitter that I dove into some angles of this. So there's kind of like two parts of this question, I guess, that I think are important to understand. The first thing is that is chain abstraction a VC hype narrative? I don't necessarily think it can be reduced to that. I will say, though, chain abstraction is absolutely a buzzword. I'm not going to pretend that like chain abstraction is like beyond being a buzzword. It absolutely is, and it's used probably way more than it needs to be to refer to too many things. And so there is definitely some lack of clarity around like what really is chain abstraction. Like, we're just using it for everything here, right? So I absolutely understand that, and I agree there that is probably it is a problem with the narrative right now, and it's a problem with all narratives in the space, especially as they gain traction. They become more and more of a buzzword as they gain popularity. But chain abstraction at its core, when you really understand like what it is, chain abstraction is solving a really fundamental problem in this space, and it's only getting worse. And so chain abstraction is a little bit different than some other narratives, where it's sort of like a lot of other narratives are like promising huge performance boosts or like massive changes based on just like the fact that we're introducing something new to the ecosystem. But I wouldn't necessarily say that chain abstraction is actually a net new change or piece of infrastructure. Chain abstraction is a solution to a problem that has been emerging and proliferating more and more recently. And that solution will absolutely have some impacts, but it's a solution. It's not a some new thing that we need to adopt in like some brand new technology that is going to shift things, right? As Zcans and these other things that are more so of like new enhancements rather than actual solutions to large problems. And so chain abstraction is a solution to this problem of fragmentation. And so fragmentation has been around forever in the space, right? Even back like Bitcoin, Ethereum, and the small group of chains that there was, fragmentation was still a problem, of course, right? But the issue is that in Web3, we've seen this shift from this focus on essentially this idea that there's going to be one chain to sort of rule them all, that we're going to have one chain, one state machine that everybody's going to use, and we just need to compete until like eventually we find the best way to do that. But we realized, especially over the past like few years, that this is not actually the right way to think about things, especially within the Ethereum ecosystem. We've moved far beyond this whole idea and much more into this concept of actually there's not going to be one chain that everybody's going to use. Rather, we're moving towards the idea that in many cases, a lot of applications are going to choose to launch their own app chains. We're moving towards more and more rollups. We have hundreds of blockchains now. That's going to eventually move into thousands if this whole app chain centric scaling approach continues to catch on. And so as we've had this industry ideological shift away from, actually fragmentation isn't that big of an issue because we're all going to eventually just use one chain, and fragmentation is natural because we're all competing for mindshare. But as we've moved away from that towards actually the way that we're going to scale, especially within the Ethereum ecosystem, is through hundreds or thousands of app chains that each have their own block space, and there's not as much competition for block space, and people can have more tight control over the properties of the chains that they're using and where they deploy and stuff like this. As we move towards that, the issue of fragmentation has become more real, because now if we have 200 blockchains, as a user, every other application that I'm using is on a different chain now. And so that fragmentation is so much larger of an issue than it was before. And this is really important to understand, because now, especially within like the modular thesis, we have this idea that most apps are going to move to their own app chain, or we're going to have thousands or tens of thousands of rollups. And so in this future, that actually isn't possible. We cannot scale that way practically without chain abstraction, because if we try to do that, and we have, let's say, 10,000 app chains in a few years, then the user experience, we're sacrificing all sorts of every component of user experience imaginable. We're sacrificing for in the name of scalability. And so absolutely, this approach is scalable, and this is a great way to go about things, and it's distributed. It's aligned with the Web3 ethos, this way of going through and having it like a modular roll-up centric future. I think personally this is the best way to go about things, but there needs to be a solution to the UX problem that it creates, and that's where chain abstraction comes in. And so the chain abstraction is a solution to a problem that has been building up over years and years in the space of ideological shifts and innovations. And so chain abstraction looks at all this and says, we have hit the mark on how we scale, but that can't be applied practically without some sort of glue here to allow users to actually use this ecosystem in a way that's consistent. So this is the first thing that I want to point out, is that chain abstraction is absolutely a buzzword, but it's important to note that it is solving a real problem. It's not just some future technology enhancement that might do some wonders for the space. It actually is solving a real problem that will have an impact. The other thing here is that what I want to highlight is that we have this sort of notion that a lot of people talk about. And this was, I was in Brussels, and one of the main things that everybody kept saying, especially afterwards on Twitter, that many people are probably tired of hearing now, but everybody was saying, I'm tired of infra. I don't want more infra. I want apps. Where are the apps? Let's stop building infra. Let's build apps. And I totally understand this whole sentiment, and I agree. It's like there's this like exhaustion from like we have more and more infra, and there's all these like promises and stuff like that. And like so, how is this actually materializing? I think a lot of this infrastructure actually it does end up materializing, but the problem is that they're right. There really is not that many apps that can actually utilize all this. So there's this meme of like you have all these people selling shovels or pickaxes to the gold miners, but this guy comes along and he's like, and they ask him like, oh, are you here to mine gold or something like that? And he's like, no, I'm here to sell more shovels. And it's like, so it's this idea of like everybody wants to build infra, nobody wants to build apps. And so I understand that. And a big part of the reason why we don't have as many application builders, or more specifically, we don't have very many high quality applications in this space or truly innovative applications in this space, I think is mostly an issue of incentives. And so builders in this space are most incentives are aligned to build one of two things: either a lazy application that you just replicate across multiple different chains. So for example, like a Uniswap fork or whatever, or some simple application that I can just deploy in one place, deploy in a bunch of other chains, and gain decent revenue from doing so. Because each chain that I'm deploying on, each chain has its own isolated, siloed user base that will use whatever's most convenient for them. Right? So users in the space right now, they leverage applications that are most convenient, not that are most innovative. This is because they're siloed to certain chains. Why would they spend all this time bridging to another chain to use an application that's marginally better? They have no reason to. They're going to use whatever's most convenient for them in that case, whatever's the fastest route to get to do whatever they want to do, right? So they're going to use the forked DeFi protocol on this chain that they're using or whatever. And so developers, they have incentives to build stuff like this, or they have incentives to just like double down and focus on one ecosystem. So I'm going to build cookie swap on Linea or whatever, like, and that's going to be my application. I'm going to dominate the DEX market on Linea with my cookie swap, Uniswap fork, and that's going to be my method of revenue. And in that case, my application is not competing with a DEX on BNB or on Base. My addressable market, my competition is on Linea in this example. I don't care about what's being built on these other chains, because the users that are going to use my application are those that already have funds on Linea primarily. Nobody's going to bridge over to use my Uniswap fork. And so most of my user base and most of my revenue is coming from just purely being able to be a convenience on these chains. And so this is a problem, because it means that developers are not necessarily incentivized to create the most innovative applications. They're incentivized to cater towards the current state of the ecosystem, which is building things that are convenient for siloed user bases. So when we have 200 siloed user bases and 20,000 developers in this space, what ends up getting built? It's like kind of half-baked, not very innovative solutions that make enough revenue because we have this issue of fragmentation. And so this is a problem. And so most people in the space, they either build things like this, they build lazy applications across multiple different chains, or on like try to take advantage of the market on one chain and focus on that, or they build infrastructure that also is profitable to some degree, right? So it's like, how do we can say we want more apps all we want, but saying that and repeating that over and over again is not going to magically create more apps tomorrow. So how do we encourage and incentivize developers to create innovative applications, and not applications that are just taking advantage of the broken landscape that we have right now, right? And so this is where I believe chain abstraction will make maybe even a larger impact than just on the UX side. So we talk about chain abstraction a lot as like being a UX benefit. Okay, we're improving user experience, but more importantly, chain abstraction is, in my opinion, going to shift the market landscape. because what's going to happen with chain abstraction is that all of a sudden, right now, we have the issue of all of these user bases and all these chains have siloed markets, siloed users. And so applications build for those siloed users, right? And so they compete with only the other applications that are in the ecosystem that they're building towards. But all of a sudden, with chain abstraction, the proliferation of chain abstraction, what's going to happen is that, well, now users, they're not siloed anymore. Users are universalized. So with chain abstraction, the continuation of chain abstraction, users have no loyalty. They have no bind to certain ecosystems. They become agnostic. So this whole dynamic of having siloed users that we need to pander towards as application developers is totally removed. And furthermore, I'm no longer only competing for users within a certain ecosystem, because users, they're no longer confined to certain ecosystems. They're confined to the entire industry. And so my competition is not the DEX on Linea. My competition is every other application in this space that's relevant, right? And so my cookie swap application now is not as viable anymore because there's 100 million other DEXs that I'm competing with within the industry. And so what happens now is that users, first of all, they don't use applications based on convenience anymore, because there is no convenience to be had within certain chains. They use applications based on what is the best use case ultimately, what's the best application, because they're universal, they're chain agnostic now, right? So they just use apps because, like I mentioned at the beginning, all apps are on a level playing field. All apps are the same to users. It doesn't matter where these apps reside. Users just use them. And so users go to apps that are the best, not that are most convenient. And so this changes competition and changes incentives for these applications, because now, as an application developer, I can no longer build my cookie swap application or my Uniswap fork that I'm having this example here and skate by getting some revenue there. Nobody's going to use this anymore. Why would anybody use this? Because now there's all these other better applications and DEXs that they can use now. And so I need to either adapt and spend time creating something that's innovative and actually competitive, or I die out. And so this is going to change this incentives for developers, where now they are truly incentivized to create innovative applications that can capture users and that have use cases and have product market fit that actually make people want to use these applications, right? So it can no longer be out of convenience. It has to be out of quality. And so because of this, and because of this shift in competition, all of these applications are now going to need to adapt or die to fit this new market narrative. And as a result, what I believe and what I hope is that we're going to see this whole, we need better apps, that will actually materialize. And so this whole we need better apps won't happen until the incentives are aligned. And so I think chain abstraction will align those incentives in a way that makes it practical for these applications and these developers to focus on creative, innovative use cases, because that's how they capture users now, right? And so if I today focus all my resources on creating something innovative, there's actually not that much money in it, or there's unless I create something that's a truly groundbreaking, there's not that much attached to it. And so for example, I would need to create the next pump.fun or Poly market. And so that's a tall order for some of these developers. And so right now it's not very practical, but in this ecosystem where the incentives, like I mentioned, are pushing towards competitive, innovative applications that optimize for quality, that's where it becomes a lot more practical to focus your resources on this. And so developers, I think, will start to build applications that are far more unique, that are higher quality, that are more user-centric, that take user expectations and user needs into account, because ultimately it becomes a total free market. Who can best address user needs? Who can best capture user mindshare? And whoever does that will win. And that shift, that small shift, I think will make a pretty massive change to the industry that will hopefully bring on, number one, more consumers, because we have more applications that are actually worth using. And number two, we'll have developers that can actually create things that take advantage of blockchain and this whole technology that we're pushing towards. And so I think this is actually the more interesting impact of chain abstraction beyond just the surface level UX improvements. It's the fundamental changes to the market. And so to all that's being said, to go back to the original question, which is this a VC hype narrative? It's a buzzword, but the impacts here are actually not understood as much as you might think. The impacts here, I think, are going to be massive. Maybe I'm overhyping it a little bit, but I do think that in a lot of cases, this is more than just some fee improvement, or we have marginally faster transactions, and we have built-in account abstraction, whatever. These things that we've been hyping up for a long time that maybe might not deserve the hype. This is something that is actually addressing a real problem and making a real market change. And I think that is going to materialize as a more impactful and real narrative than a lot of the other narratives that we've seen in the past. It is still absolutely a buzzword, and I'm sure most of the talk that people are having about it will lead to nowhere. But I do think that these fundamental changes are going to be truly impactful and are worth talking about and optimizing for, at least. So that's how I'm thinking about.
Yeah, I think you really articulated kind of like the second and maybe third order effects of what this does down the road. And as you were kind of walking through that, I just thought like, wow, there's going to be a whole new cohort of developers that come into the space and start building for the entire ecosystem from day one, rather than, somebody siloed in, BNB or on the Ethereum network or wherever and just building for maybe that community or audience. Like, devs are now going to enter the space building for the entire crypto network, which is really cool to see and think of. Curious then, with that in mind and with that kind of being the end state, what sort of like new apps or use cases do you think this opens up? Like, again, if we were to take this back to an application, like, okay, now that this exists or this will exist soon, what can be built? Do you have any like examples or things that you've been thinking of that this could open up?
Yeah, I think there's sort of like, I guess, two parts to this. The first is, I think a big part of like what we're going to see as a result of chain abstraction is, at least like in terms of like specific changes to applications, is that basically every application in the space today can be reimagined to some degree using chain abstraction. Because again, like it's to the same properties that I mentioned a moment ago, these applications need to basically change and adapt and create new versions of themselves to sort of fit within this chain agnostic future. So that's the first part. I think actually every use case that already exists can be reimagined to a large extent within kind of this chain abstraction thesis. I think also what we're going to see a lot more of, and what I'm particularly excited for, is what I mentioned briefly a little while ago, which is this idea of chain agnostic applications. And so maybe this is a little bit too broad, not like a specific type of app or like a specific use case necessarily, but I think this is quite interesting, where we're going to see a lot of applications pop up through the means of these sort of like application level chain abstraction solutions or orchestration or whatever it may be. Those types of solutions are going to enable chain agnostic applications that what we're going to see is actually will very easily existing and compose across multiple different chains. So you can imagine if I want to go to an application, let's like use DeFi as an example, and I want to earn the best yield I can on my USDC. Let's say the best yield I can earn on that right now is staking TIA. And that's like the most sustainable best yield that I can earn. I need to stake TIA through, some Cosmos app chain somewhere, right? And so, but I have like this USDC that I want to earn yield on, I have it on Base, right? And so like right now, that's hugely complicated to do, to go from USDC on Base to stake TIA on like some Cosmos app chain. This sucks. And so what we're going to see is applications that you go to, like DeFi applications, where you can do these strategies, you can do these things and do these operations. You just sign once, and these applications will take care of the rest, where they just do very simple operations. You do one signature. And as a result, all these things that would take you hours to do right now, you're going to click one button, and these multi-chain operations are going to be done for you. And you're going to have the stake TIA, you're going to be earning your yield and so on. And then you can withdraw it, and you have your USDC on Base or whatever you were originally using. And as a user, of course, you don't know where these funds reside. At the same time, you're just looking at it from the perspective of, okay, I'm earning yield from this X and Y operation now. Now, I think that's where we're going to see a lot of value come up. That's like net new from what we currently have, which is the ability for applications to have workflows that capture value from multiple different chains, right? Because chain abstraction is not necessarily going to reduce the fact that each chain is going to have their own value and their own yield opportunities and stuff like this. This still retains all these properties of chains are still maintained. So as a result, we can optimize for these things, and of course, these applications can just do whatever works best for the user in this specific case, which will most often, in my opinion, be across multiple different chains within the ecosystem. And so I think this type of use case is going to, in my opinion, is what's most interesting. The ability for applications to compose and do workflows across various different chains simultaneously. I think this is what's going to be the biggest change from chain abstraction, at least from the application perspective.
Teller is a decentralized protocol that enables anyone to borrow or lend using any Ethereum asset. You can think of a Teller loan as a DeFi cash advance, one where you can use any of your favorite ERC20 tokens as collateral to get an instant USDC loan. Discover the power of a DeFi cash advance today at Teller.org.
At Moonbeam, We're building a world where the wonders of decentralized technology are accessible to everyone. We're advancing Web3 integration through product enhancements, funding for innovation, and investment in our partner ecosystem. Our product roadmap includes ZK initiatives, tokenomics updates, and 8x throughput. Our $10 million innovation fund invests in startups that deliver cutting-edge solutions for RWAs and Web3 gaming. And our partner ecosystem continues to grow through grants and incentives. Moonbeams is delivering frictionless user and builder experiences to create the future of the internet on-chain. Join us by participating in the Moonrise campaign today.
Tabasco, as users, how can we trust Particle Network? How will we know that the network has come to consensus as we're benefiting from using all these different networks united as this one universal account?
Yeah. This is when we're looking at our architecture, we basically had two paths that we could have taken. We could have gone the first path where we basically coordinated everything through universal accounts and through a centralized server. This would require trust. And so we decided not to go this route where we kind of kept everything centralized and essentially coordinated. So what we did instead is we actually, as you might see on our website or on our tagline, we actually have a Cosmos app chain. We have an L1 that we use instead for decentralized coordination. So this is really important because universal accounts, especially when it comes to moving funds across chains, they do a lot of different operations. And so these operations are basically coordinated and verified and settled through the means of an L1. Rather than trusting a centralized entity to do this, we have a very standard blockchain that basically goes through, and every set of operations that you send with a universal account, or everything that you do, it goes through a decentralized validation process, and ultimately also gets settled on our chain. And so this allows us to have universal accounts operate with pretty high security guarantees, and there's no trust involved in a centralized entity basically saying, these operations are valid and stuff like this. And so we basically have a very large network of validators that we're going to be having within Mainnet, as well as sort of we have what you can consider a dual consensus mechanism. So I won't get too deep into the weeds, but our chain is everything that we built around our L1. First of all, just to clarify, the L1 is a infrastructure component, and this is something that we're going to be articulating more. It's users don't use the L1, developers don't deploy on it. It exists purely in the background just to improve the security guarantees and coordinate universal accounts. And so with that said, basically everything that we did when we were designing this was centered around the idea of reducing a single point of failure. How do we remove any potential single points of failure where everything is robust to the point where we can have a very reliable mechanism of coordinating, verifying, and settling cross-chain transactions. And so this came down to, especially at the consensus level, we actually used two different validator sets. We use one validator set from Particle that is secured by our native token, or what will be our native token. These are a large number of some of the biggest validators in the space, including many Cosmos validators. We have about 25 of the largest validators that we've onboarded that are going to be on Mainnet. And then we have a second validator set that is actually secured by Bitcoin. So if you guys are familiar with Babylon, we're big fans of their project. We're very close with their team. And we actually have another validator set that contributes to consensus that is secured by BTC. The reason why we did this was that we were worried about the lack of resiliency that would happen as a result of purely using a single validator set secured by a volatile token. Because our own token, especially upon launch, is going to be volatile for a period of time. And so that brings lack of economic security and reduce security guarantees from the means of the chain. And so what we can do is we use BTC to counteract that. And we can use that second validator set with Bitcoin, staked Bitcoin through the means of Babylon as a measure against that. And so this is essentially how we keep a very secure and resilient chain that has no single point of failure and isn't subject to eventually what will be the volatility of our token. And all that said, we chose this design specifically to make sure that universal accounts are as distributed and decentralized as possible and aren't reliant on a single entity to ensure security. And so that's basically the purpose of our blockchain.
Tabasco, what's the status then of Particle Network? When will Mainnet be live? And then can you tell us a bit about how we'll get started there? Can I expect to use a wallet like MetaMask, or will I need to download a Particle Network specific type of wallet?
Yeah, for sure. Mainnet is quite close, actually. We're shooting for Mainnet in right now, probably either late Q3 or early Q4. That's kind of our general timeline. Of course, things shift, but That's what we're looking at the moment. We're going to have some initial use cases and implementations of universal accounts between now and then that, will allow people to get their hands on with universal accounts before. But ultimately, the actual onboarding flow here, once we do release some initial implementations and eventually mainnet, the flow here is actually very straightforward for end users. You can use your MetaMask, you can use your Phantom wallet or Kepler wallet or Unisat wallet or whatever you want to do. We allow users to basically onboard universal accounts using any interface that they want to, any wallet that they're comfortable with. And so by doing so, once you kind of create a universal account, once you onboard with your MetaMask wallet, for example, you have a smart account. So it's very similar to the current account abstraction flow where your MetaMask or your underlying wallet is used to basically generate a smart account, in this case a universal account, that you then have funds on and that you use for these transactions. And so you're going to be able to use your universal account through Wallet Connect, or eventually you might have things like an extension and some other ways that you can actually leverage this. But the actual underlying wallet that's used for this, that signs transactions and is sort of the owner of this universal account, is your MetaMask. So for end users, it's going to be as simple as you go to an application that supports universal accounts. You connect your MetaMask. You see, you have your universal account there on this application. You can see all your balances. You do transactions, and it's as simple as that. I have my balances that are consolidated across every different chain that I'm using. I do a transaction. That transaction might be taking balances from 5 or 6 different chains. If I have USDC scattered across 10 different chains now, I want to buy an NFT on OpenSea, then that might take advantage of those funds across all those different chains and automatically bridge from all these chains over to whatever chain I'm buying the NFT on and do it for me. But as a user, I see my balances here. I have this much USDC, I have this much ETH, whatever. I want to buy this NFT, I click buy, and it happens. And so it's going to be that simple for end users. Connect whatever wallet you want, have your funds there, and the application will show you what funds that you have, do transactions, and that's the end of it. You don't need to think about where your balances are, sort of like and any other nuances that are typically related to this type of experience. And so this is what the actual user flow will look like. And this is what we're expecting to be ready to go, and what you're going to be able to get your hands on in just the next 3 to 4 months, ideally.
Tabasco, this is a good place, I think, for us to start to wrap up. So I want to remind our listeners that they can learn more by going to particle.network. They should follow, it's Particle Network, just no E or O in the network. That's the account on Twitter or X. We'll put that into our show notes so you make sure you find the right one. And then make sure folks follow Tabasco Web3, which is Tabasco's Twitter account as well. And again, that's in our show notes, so you can find that there. Thank you so much for coming on. This was just a fascinating conversation about chain abstraction. To your point earlier, they're buzzwords, but there's so much more to them, because the ability to actually benefit from chain abstractions here, we're just waiting on like the likes of Particle Network, Mainnet to go live. And we know lots of other like really talented folks working in this space. Do you think you could close us out though with, is there any sort of like points program for us as users to get involved with? Like any recommendation for like how to start contributing as a user? Is there a points program that is available right now, or do we need to wait for Mainnet to go live?
Yeah. Thank you again for having me on. To hit that point, I think it was a great conversation. And chain abstraction is a very new topic and a new vertical, and so there's a lot of noise around it, and a lot of kind of different ways of looking at it. But we've spent a lot of time kind of having conversations with many other projects in the space, and so I think we kind of hit the nail on the head with a lot of those questions and kind of general points in terms of what chain abstraction is and kind of where it's at. So hopefully it was helpful there. In terms of like points programs and what you can do with Particle right now, we do have a program at the moment called Particle Pioneer. This basically is giving users the ability to try universal accounts early. They're still, of course, very much in development, but you can already give them a try. You can do some transactions. We have like NFT minting, different things, just to give power users and those that are interested in the space the ability to actually try them, and we have points you can earn as a result. And so it's basically just simply rewarding you for using universal accounts, giving it a try, putting it to the test. And, of course, if you have any feedback for us, we'd love to kind of take that into account. And of course, it's a big stress test for us because it's allowing us to test about infrastructure and stuff like this. And so this is ongoing. This is probably going to continue for the next few weeks at least, leading into eventually this period before Mainnet. And so you can go to, I believe it's pioneer.particle.network, if you want to give it a try, if you want to, see what universal accounts will look like, you can connect your MetaMask. Like I mentioned, you have all of your balances there. You can send transactions to anybody using balances from multiple different chains, mint NFTs using balances from multiple different chains, and so on. So there's a lot of really cool kind of moving components there. Love for anybody to give it a try. You can earn some points in the meantime. And if you have any feedback or any ideas for how we can make it better, you can always DM me at Tabasco Web3 on Twitter, and love to see what we can do.
Thanks everyone for tuning in. If you're a talented founder or developer, please consider reaching out to our team at fourthrevolution.capital. And for future episodes of the Edge podcast, please check out our link tree at edge_pod.